The scorching Texas sun beat down relentlessly as Winifred Taylor struggled to keep her footing on the rocky terrain. She'd never intended to venture this far from town alone, but the letter burning a hole in her satchel had driven her to recklessness. Now, miles from any semblance of civilization, that recklessness was about to cost her dearly. The year was 1876, and Taylor, Texas wasn't just a town, it was Winifred's namesake, though not by birth. The small but growing cattle community had been founded by her late father, and with his passing 3 months prior, the responsibility of his ranch and business dealings had fallen squarely on her slender shoulders. At 23, Winnie, as most called her, was determined to prove herself capable of handling her inheritance, despite the constant pressure from the town council to sell to wealthy cattle barons. That determination had led her out here, searching for the survey markers that would prove the contested northern boundary of her property markers, that would invalidate the claim being made by Thaddeus Montgomery, the richest and most ruthless rancher in the county. The council meeting was in 2 days, and she needed evidence. Just a little further, she muttered to herself, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her chestnut mare, Penny, whinnied nervously behind her, tethered to a scraggly mesquite tree as Winnie climbed higher up the rocky slope. The ground beneath her shifted suddenly. Her foot slipped on loose shale, twisting violently to the side as she fell. The sickening crunch and immediate wave of pain told her this was no simple stumble. Winnie cried out, the sound echoing across the empty landscape as she clutched at her ankle, tears springing to her eyes. "No, no, no," she whispered, trying to stand only to collapse back down with a gasp. The ankle was already swelling, visible even through her riding boot. Panic rose in her chest. She was at least 10 miles from town, with the sun climbing higher in the cloudless sky. No one knew exactly where she'd gone. She'd been too cautious about Montgomery's spies to tell anyone her destination. Penny nickered nervously, sensing her distress. Winnie contemplated trying to mount, but one look at the distance between her and the mare, not to mention the height of the stirrup, told her that was impossible without help. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding small against the vastness surrounding her. "Is anyone there?" The only response was the mocking cry of a distant hawk. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Winnie had managed to drag herself beneath the meager shade of the mesquite tree, her canteen half empty already. The throbbing in her ankle had settled into a steady, nauseating pain. She tried binding it with her handkerchief, but the swelling continued relentlessly. As noon approached, the distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap. Shielding her eyes against the glare, she spotted a lone rider approaching from the west, not from the direction of town. "Help," she called, waving frantically. "Over here." The rider changed course, heading toward her. As he drew closer, Winnie made out the tall silhouette of a man on a powerful black stallion. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, obscuring his face, but his posture in the saddle spoke of confidence and strength. "Are you hurt, madam?" His deep voice carried across the distance between them before he'd fully arrived. "My ankle," she replied, relief washing over her. "I fell and can't walk." The rider dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse beside hers before approaching. When he knelt beside her, pushing his hat back, Winnie's breath caught. She recognized him immediately, Victor Thornton, the new foreman at the Davidson Ranch bordering her property to the east. She'd seen him in town a handful of times since his arrival 2 months ago. Tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer storm and features that seemed carved from granite, he cut an imposing figure that had set the local women gossiping. But beyond exchanging brief nods on the boardwalk outside the general store, they'd never spoken. "Miss Taylor," he said, recognition flashing in his eyes. "What are you doing all the way out here alone?" "I could ask you the same, Mr. Thornton," she replied, wincing as he gently moved her hands away from her ankle, his mouth quirked slightly. "Fair enough. I'm tracking strays from Davidson's herd." His fingers probed her ankle with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "This is a bad sprain, maybe worse. You won't be walking on it any time soon." Winnie bit her lip, fighting tears of pain and frustration. "I need to get back to town." "That's 10 miles at least," he observed, his brow furrowing as he scanned the horizon. "And it'll be dark in a few hours." He seemed to come to a decision, nodding once to himself. "I'll have to carry you." "Carry me?" she repeated, heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "That's not necessary. If you could just help me onto Penny, begging your pardon, Miss Taylor, but that's not going to work. The way back is too rough, and you'd likely fall and make that injury worse." His expression brooked no argument. "I'll carry you to my horse, then we'll ride double back to town." Before she could protest further, he'd scooped her into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. Winnie gasped, instinctively clutching at his shoulders. The solid warmth of him was startling after hours in the heat alone. "I apologize for the familiarity," he said, his voice gruff as he carried her toward the horses. "But there's no help for it." "What about Penny?" she asked, trying to ignore how aware she was of his proximity. "I'll tie her to follow behind us." He settled her carefully in his saddle, then efficiently secured her mare's reins to his saddle horn. With practiced ease, he mounted behind her, one strong arm wrapping around her waist to steady her. "Thank you," she said stiffly, acutely conscious of how her back pressed against his chest. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "No need for thanks," he replied, his breath stirring the loose tendrils of hair at her temple. "Let's get you home." They set off at a careful pace. Vic, as he told her to call him, guiding the horse with expert skill over the uneven terrain. The position forced an intimacy that Winnie found both uncomfortable and oddly comforting. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been held by anyone, not since her father's illness had begun 2 years ago. "May I ask what business brought you out this far alone?" Vic's question interrupted her thoughts. "It's dangerous country for a solitary rider." Winnie hesitated. She had no reason to trust this man with her troubles, yet something about his steady presence made her want to confide in him. "I was looking for the survey markers on the northern boundary of my property," she admitted finally. "Thaddeus Montgomery is claiming 2,000 acres of Taylor land as his own, saying the boundary was marked incorrectly when my father purchased it." Vic's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Montgomery has a reputation for expanding his holdings by any means necessary. You know of him." "I've worked ranches across 3 states, Miss Taylor. Men like Montgomery exist everywhere men who believe might makes right." "The town council meets in 2 days to hear the dispute," she continued. "Without proof of the original markers, they're likely to side with him. He's been quite persuasive with several council members." "You mean he's bought them?" Vic said bluntly. Winnie sighed. "I can't prove that, but yes, I believe so." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of the horse lulling Winnie despite her pain. The sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. "You're managing the ranch alone?" Vic asked eventually. "Yes," she replied, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "My father taught me everything he knew." "I meant no offense," he said quickly. "It's admirable. Few women would take on such responsibility." "Few would be allowed to," she corrected. "I'm fortunate that my father's will was clear about his intentions." She shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position, and couldn't contain a small gasp as pain shot through her ankle. "Are you all right?" Concern deepened his voice. Just hurts, she admitted through gritted teeth. Without warning, Vic reined the horse to a stop beneath the shade of a large oak. We should rest for a moment. Let me check your ankle again. He dismounted first, then reached up to lift her down carefully. The brief sensation of sliding through his hands made Winnie's heart flutter traitorously. He set her gently on a fallen log, then knelt to examine her injury. The swelling's worse, he observed, frowning. We need to get this boot off before it becomes impossible. Winnie nodded reluctantly. Do what you must. With surprising care for such large hands, Vic unlaced her riding boot and eased it off, his touch clinical and respectful. Even so, Winnie couldn't help the tears that sprang to her eyes at the pain. I'm sorry, he said softly, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a clean bandana and a small flask. This will help with the swelling, but it'll hurt first. What is it? Whiskey, he admitted with a slight smile. External use only, I promise. Despite the pain, Winnie found herself returning his smile. My father swore by whiskey for medicinal purposes, both internal and external. Vic chuckled, the sound warm and unexpected. Smart man. He poured some of the amber liquid onto the bandana. Ready. She nodded, then gasped as he wrapped the whiskey-soaked cloth around her ankle. The burning sensation made her vision swim momentarily. Breathe through it, Vic encouraged, his hand steady on her calf. The pain will ease in a moment. True to his word, the initial burning faded, replaced by a numbing coolness that provided blessed relief. Winnie exhaled slowly, suddenly aware of how close he was, kneeling before her with the afternoon sun burnishing his dark hair with hints of auburn. Better, he asked, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, she managed. Thank you, he nodded, rising to retrieve the canteen from his saddle. You should drink. It's easy to get parched out here without realizing it. Winnie accepted the canteen gratefully, taking several long swallows of the cool water. How much further to town? At this pace, we won't make it before nightfall, he admitted, scanning the horizon. There's a line shack about 3 miles east that belongs to the Davidson Ranch. We can shelter there for the night and continue at first light. Alarm flashed through her. Stay overnight, alone. The impropriety of such an arrangement would set tongues wagging from Taylor to Austin. Vic's expression remained impassive, though she thought she detected a slight tightening around his eyes. I understand your concern, Miss Taylor, but I see no alternative that doesn't risk your health. The temperature drops quickly after sunset, and traveling in the dark with an injury is unwise. Winnie knew he was right, but the prospect of spending the night unchaperoned with a man she barely knew, even one who had shown her nothing but respect, made her stomach flutter with nerves. I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will remain intact, Vic continued solemnly. I'll sleep outside the shack if it would make you more comfortable. The sincerity in his voice decided her. That won't be necessary, Mr. Thornton. I trust your word. And strangely, she realized she did trust him, despite knowing so little about him. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you for your trust. It's not given lightly, I imagine. No, she agreed. It's not. He helped her back onto the horse and they continued eastward. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed, the rocky terrain giving way to more hospitable grasslands dotted with mesquite and oak. The setting sun painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. It's beautiful, Winnie murmured, almost to herself. One of the reasons I've stayed in Texas, Vic replied. There's a vastness to the sky here that I've never found elsewhere. Have you traveled much? Enough to know what I'm looking for, he said enigmatically. And what is that? He was silent for a moment before answering. A place worth putting down roots. Something in his tone made Winnie curious. You've been moving from ranch to ranch since the war ended, yes. The war. It explained much about his stoic demeanor and the shadows she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. Many men had returned from the conflict changed, searching for peace in the vast expanses of the West. "Were you very young when you fought?" she asked softly. 17 when I enlisted," he replied, his voice neutral. 20 when it ended, old enough by then. When he heard what he didn't say, old enough to have seen and done things no young man should have to experience. She didn't press further. "There it is," Vic said after they'd ridden in companionable silence for some time, pointing to a simple wooden structure nestled among a stand of oak trees. "Not much to look at, but it'll keep us out of the night air." The line shack was indeed humble, a single-room cabin with a small porch, used by cowboys during roundups when they were too far from the main ranch to return at night. As they approached, Vic whistled a distinct pattern, waiting a moment before proceeding. "Checking if anyone's already using it," he explained. "Cowboys have a code about these things." He helped her dismount, again lifting her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the porch. Setting her carefully on a rough-hewn bench, he said, "Let me check inside first, then see to the horses." The interior of the shack proved simple but clean. A small iron stove sat in one corner, a narrow cot against the far wall, and a table with 2 mismatched chairs completed the sparse furnishings. Vic carried her inside, settling her on the cot before returning to tend to the horses. Winnie took the opportunity to assess her surroundings more thoroughly. A shelf held basic provisions: coffee, beans, flour, salt left for whoever might need shelter. A well-used coffee pot sat atop the stove, and a stack of firewood was neatly piled beside it. Despite its simplicity, the shack felt welcoming after the long, painful hours outdoors. Vic returned with their saddlebags and her satchel, which she'd nearly forgotten in her distress. "There's a pump out back," he informed her. "I'll fetch some water and get a fire started. It gets cold out here at night." "Thank you." She clutched her satchel, relieved to still have the letter that had sent her on this ill-fated journey, a letter from her father's old surveyor, now living in San Antonio, who had promised to provide testimony about the original property boundaries if she could find even one of the original markers. As Vic busied himself with preparations, Winnie couldn't help observing him. There was an efficiency to his movements that spoke of a man accustomed to self-reliance. Yet there was also a gentleness in how he handled her injury that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. Soon, a small fire crackled in the stove, and the aroma of coffee filled the shack. Vic had also discovered some dried beef and beans, which he set to simmer in a small pot. "Not exactly the dinner you're accustomed to," he apologized, bringing her a steaming cup of coffee. "You'd be surprised what I'm accustomed to," she replied with a small smile. "Ranch life isn't all Sunday dinners and social calls, even for the owner's daughter." He quirked an eyebrow. "No offense meant, Miss Taylor. I've just heard tell that your father ran one of the most prosperous operations in the county." "He did," she acknowledged, sipping the strong coffee gratefully. "But he also believed in knowing every aspect of the business. I've mended fences, helped with calving, and eaten my share of trail food." Vic nodded approvingly as he stirred the pot on the stove. "That explains why you were out looking for those markers yourself instead of sending a hand." "Partly," she admitted, "but also because I didn't know who I could trust. Montgomery has been trying to buy our land since my father fell ill, and he's not above bribing people to get what he wants." "Why is he so set on your property specifically?" Vic asked, dishing up 2 plates of the simple stew. Winnie accepted her portion with thanks. "Water," she said simply. "The northern section he's claiming contains 3 natural springs that feed Cypress Creek. In a drought year, those springs could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin." Understanding dawned in Vic's eyes. And your father refused to sell. Repeatedly, she confirmed. The last time Montgomery came calling, 6 months before father died, he told him he'd rather see the ranch burned to the ground than in Montgomery's hands. Strong words. My father was a gentle man, but firm in his convictions. Winnie's voice softened with memory. He believed land was a trust, not just a possession. The springs on our property serve more than just our cattle. They are part of the watershed for the entire valley. They ate in thoughtful silence for a while. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the night sounds of the Texas wilderness creating a symphony around them. Through the small window, stars were becoming visible in the vast expanse of sky. Your ankle needs tending again, Vic said finally, setting aside his empty plate. May I? At her nod, he knelt before her once more, unwrapping the whiskey-soaked bandage with careful hands. The swelling had reduced somewhat, but angry bruising had begun to appear, mottling her skin in shades of purple and blue. It's not broken, he assessed, gently probing the injury. But it's a severe sprain. You'll need to stay off it for at least a week. Winnie frowned. I can't afford a week. The council meeting is in 2 days, I know. He rewrapped her ankle with a fresh bandage, this time using strips torn from a clean shirt he'd pulled from his saddlebag. Did you find what you were looking for today? The survey markers? She shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. No, I thought I was close when I fell. She hesitated, then added, I have a letter from the original surveyor offering testimony, but without physical evidence. The council might not give it much weight, Vic finished for her. He sat back on his heels, considering. What exactly do these markers look like? Iron stakes with brass caps, she explained. They'd be set approximately every quarter-mile along the boundary line, driven into the ground with the date and my father's initials engraved on the cap. Vic nodded slowly. And you're certain the area you were searching is where they should be? According to the original survey maps, yes. Winnie reached for her satchel, withdrawing a folded document. This is a copy of the survey. The northern boundary follows the limestone ridge about 2 miles north of where I fell. He studied the map carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. I know this area. Davidson's herd sometimes grazes near there during summer months. He looked up at her, determination in his eyes. I could look for you tomorrow while you rest here. Surprise and hope flared within her. You would do that. Why? For the first time, Vic seemed uncomfortable, his gaze dropping momentarily. I've seen men like Montgomery before, men who use their power to take what isn't theirs. It doesn't sit well with me. There was a story there, Winnie sensed, but this wasn't the time to press. I would be incredibly grateful, Mr. Thornton. Vic, he reminded her gently. If we're going to be allies against Montgomery, we might as well use our given names. Vic, she agreed with a small smile. And please call me Winnie. Only the bank manager calls me Winifred, and only when he's trying to convince me to sell treasury bonds. That earned her another of his rare smiles, transforming his stern features into something that made her heart beat a little faster. Winnie it is, he said, rising to his feet. You should get some rest. I'll take care of cleaning up. Night fell fully around the small shack, the darkness outside making the humble interior seem all the more snug and intimate. Vic insisted that Winnie take the cot while he made a pallet for himself on the floor near the stove. Despite her protests that she was imposing enough already, he remained adamant. I've slept on worse, he assured her, arranging his bedroll. Much worse. As they settled in for the night, the small space filled with the soft sounds of the fire crackling in the stove and the occasional call of a night bird outside. Winnie lay awake, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling, acutely aware of the man resting just a few feet away. Under any other circumstances, she would have been scandalized by the situation. Yet there was something about Vic that inspired trust, a steadiness that went beyond mere physical strength. "May I ask you something?" she ventured into the darkness. "Of course." His deep voice came back immediately, suggesting he too was awake. "Why did you come to Taylor? It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." There was a long silence, and Winnie began to think he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "I was looking for peace, I suppose. After the war, I drifted from place to place, never staying long. Texas seemed as good a place as any to try putting down those roots I mentioned. And have you found it, peace?" Another pause. "Some days I think I might be getting closer." The simple honesty in his answer touched her. "I hope you find it, Vic." "Thank you, Winnie." The way he said her name soft, almost reverent, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Sleep eventually claimed her, the exhaustion of the day and the lingering pain of her injury pulling her under. Her last conscious thought was gratitude that of all the people who might have found her, fate had sent Vic Thornton. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the small window. Winnie woke to find Vic already up, stoking the fire in the stove and brewing fresh coffee. The domestic scene struck her with unexpected poignancy. How long had it been since she'd shared a quiet morning with anyone? "How's the ankle?" he asked, noticing she was awake. Winnie cautiously flexed her foot, wincing at the immediate protest of tender ligaments. "Still painful, but the swelling seems better." Vic nodded, pouring coffee into a tin cup and bringing it to her. "Good. I've already seen to the horses. I'll head out to look for those markers as soon as you've had something to eat." He'd prepared a simple breakfast of biscuits warmed on the stove top and the last of the dried beef. They ate companionably, discussing the best route for Vic to take based on the survey map. His knowledge of the local terrain impressed her. He seemed to know every ridge and draw in the area, despite having been in Taylor for only 2 months. "How will I repay you for all this?" Winnie asked as he prepared to leave. "You've done so much already." Vic shook his head, buckling on his gun belt. "No repayment necessary, just rest that ankle while I'm gone." He hesitated, then added, "I've left the pistol from my saddlebag on the table. It's loaded, just in case." The implication that someone might come looking for her hung unspoken between them. Winnie nodded her understanding. "Be careful." "Always am," he replied with a slight smile. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'll find your proof, Winnie. I promise." Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the morning quiet. Alone in the shack, Winnie found herself replaying their conversations, analyzing each look and word. There was something about Victor Thornton that called to her, something beyond his timely rescue or his willingness to help. A depth of character, perhaps, that resonated with her own. The day stretched long before her. She managed to hop around the small space enough to make herself more coffee and tend to basic needs, but mostly she rested, elevating her ankle as Vic had suggested. By mid-afternoon, worry began to gnaw at her. He should have returned by now if his search had been unsuccessful. The longer he stayed away, the more hopeful she became that he had found something, and the more concerned she grew for his safety. Montgomery was not above using force to get what he wanted. If he or his men spotted Vic searching near the disputed boundary. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from these dark thoughts. Winnie reached for the pistol Vic had left, her heart pounding. A moment later, relief flooded her as she recognized his distinctive whistle outside. The door opened and Vic entered, dust-covered and weary-looking but with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I found one," he announced without preamble. "And better than that, I found evidence of tampering." Winnie's heart leapt. "Tampering?" Vic nodded grimly, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. 3 of the markers have been recently dug up and moved about a quarter-mile south of their original positions. I could tell because the ground around them was disturbed, and they hadn't settled properly. But how does that help us? It's just your word against Montgomery's men. A slow smile spread across Vic's face. Except that whoever moved them didn't realize the original surveyor had buried small marker stones beneath each stake as a backup. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a smooth stone with initials and numbers carved into it. This was beneath where the stake should have been according to your map. The date matches your father's purchase exactly. Winnie stared at the stone, hope blooming in her chest. This could be enough. There's more, Vic continued, pulling out a small notebook. I sketched the locations of both the moved stakes and the original positions with measurements. And I found boot prints around the disturbed area's boots with a distinctive star pattern on the heel that I've seen Montgomery's foreman wearing in town. Tears of relief and gratitude welled in Winnie's eyes. Vic, I don't know how to thank you. He shook his head, his expression softening as he looked at her. Seeing that land stay in the right hands will be thanks enough. He hesitated, then added more quietly, and knowing you're safe. Something in his voice made her look up sharply, meeting his gaze. The intensity she found there made her breath catch. I was worried when you didn't return sooner, she admitted. I wanted to be thorough, he explained, moving to pour himself some coffee. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't followed back here. That sobered her quickly. You think Montgomery's men might be looking for me? It's possible, Vic acknowledged. If they know you were searching for evidence, they might be concerned about what you found. He sat across from her, his expression grave. We should leave at first light tomorrow. Get you back to town before the council meeting. Winnie nodded, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable their position was and how completely her safety depended on the man before her. A man who, just 24 hours ago, had been little more than a familiar face on the street. Why are you helping me, Vic? She asked softly. The truth this time. He looked down at his coffee cup, considering his words carefully. When he raised his eyes to meet hers again, there was a rawness in them that caught her off guard. I told you I've seen men like Montgomery before, he began slowly. What I didn't say was that one such man took everything from my family when I was 15, our farm in Virginia, our livelihood, even indirectly my father's life. He had connections on the county board, just like Montgomery does here. His jaw tightened at the memory. I joined the war partly to escape, partly hoping I wouldn't come back. But I did come back, and I've been drifting ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to care what happens. Until now, Winnie said quietly. Until now, he agreed. Something about this place, about you standing alone against a man like that. He shook his head. I couldn't just ride away this time. The honesty of his confession moved her deeply. On impulse, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm glad you didn't. His hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that should have alarmed her but somehow felt right. They stayed that way for a long moment, connected by more than just their joined hands, connected by a shared understanding of loss and determination. The rest of the day passed in quiet conversation as they learned more about each other. Vic spoke of his years after the war, riding from ranch to ranch across the West. Winnie shared stories of growing up on the Taylor Ranch, of her mother's early death and her father's patient guidance. As evening fell, the easy companionship between them deepened into something neither was quite ready to name, but both could feel taking root. Night brought another simple meal shared by lamplight, their conversation flowing naturally from practical matters of returning to town to more personal reflections. Winnie found herself telling Vic things she'd never shared with anyone, her fears about running the ranch alone, her determination to honor her father's legacy, her secret dreams of someday finding a partner who would stand beside her rather than taking over. "Most men expect a woman to step aside," she explained, staring into the depths of her coffee cup, "to become merely a wife rather than remaining her own person." "Most men are fools then," Vic replied simply. "A partnership should make both people stronger, not diminish either one." Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits finding each other against all odds. The night that followed was another exercise in propriety maintained despite growing attraction. Winnie again took the cot while Vic slept on his bedroll, but there was a new awareness between them that made the small space feel even more intimate than before. Morning came with a sense of both anticipation and regret. Anticipation for confronting Montgomery with their evidence. Regret that this strange, enclosed time together was ending. Vic checked Winnie's ankle again before they departed, his touch clinical but his eyes revealing deeper concern. "It's improving," he told her, "but you'll need to stay off it as much as possible for several more days." "I will," she promised. After the council meeting, the journey back to town was slower than either would have liked, Vic careful to keep the pace steady to avoid jarring Winnie's injury. They rode double again, but the awkwardness of the previous day had transformed into a comfortable awareness of each other. Winnie found herself leaning into Vic's solid presence behind her, drawing strength from his steady support. As they approached the outskirts of Taylor, reality began to intrude on their private world. Vic felt Winnie tense slightly in front of him. "Worried about what people will say?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied after a moment's consideration. "Strangely, I'm not. There are more important things at stake than gossip." He chuckled softly, the rumble of it vibrating against her back. "A refreshing attitude. Most women in your position would be concerned." "I've never been very good at being most women," she admitted. "My father used to say I was born arguing with convention." "Lucky for the Taylor Ranch," Vic observed as they rode past the first scattered buildings of town. "And lucky for me." The implications of that quiet statement hung between them as they made their way down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. By the time they reached the Taylor Ranch house at the end of the wide avenue, word of their arrival had preceded them. Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper who had helped raise Winnie after her mother's death, was waiting anxiously on the front porch. "Winifred Taylor," the older woman exclaimed as Vic drew the horse to a stop. "We've been worried sick. Where on earth have you been?" "It's a long story, Mrs. Abernathy," Winnie replied as Vic dismounted and reached up to help her down. "I had an accident out by the northern ridge. Mr. Thornton found me and helped me back." The housekeeper's eyes widened as she took in Winnie's injured ankle and the easy familiarity between her and Vic. Before she could comment, however, another voice interrupted. Well, what have we here?" Thaddeus Montgomery himself was approaching on horseback, flanked by two of his ranch hands. Tall and imposing despite his 60 years, with iron-gray hair and cold blue eyes, he exuded an air of entitlement that set Vic's teeth on edge. "Miss Taylor," Montgomery continued, his voice falsely solicitous, "we've been quite concerned when you couldn't be found yesterday. I see you've been well looked after." His gaze flicked dismissively over Vic. "Mr. Montgomery," Winnie acknowledged coolly. "As you can see, I had a mishap but am safely returned. Is there something you needed?" Montgomery dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. "Merely ensuring your welfare, my dear. The council meeting is tomorrow, after all, and I wouldn't want you to miss the opportunity to gracefully concede the boundary dispute." Vic felt Winnie stiffen beside him, her hand unconsciously tightening on his arm where he supported her. "There will be no concession, Mr. Montgomery," she stated firmly. "In fact, I look forward to presenting evidence of the true boundary line and of recent tampering with the survey markers." Montgomery's confident expression faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Tampering? What an imagination you have, Miss Taylor. The markers are exactly where they've always been." "Are they?" Vic interjected, his voice deceptively calm. "Including the ones that were recently dug up and moved a quarter-mile south. The ones with disturbed soil and boot prints matching your foreman's distinctive heel pattern." The rancher's face darkened. "And who might you be to make such accusations?" "Victor Thornton, currently working for Davidson's spread," Vic replied evenly. "And a witness to your attempted land theft." Montgomery's hand moved subtly toward his gun, but Vic's warning look stopped him. The older man clearly recognized something in Vic's stance: the readiness, the calm certainty of a man who had faced worse threats than an aging rancher with delusions of empire. "Be careful making accusations you can't support, Thornton," Montgomery said coldly. "This town knows me. You're nothing but a drifter." "A drifter with evidence," Winnie countered. "And the original survey marker stones that your men didn't know to look for when they moved the stakes." Real alarm flashed across Montgomery's face now. "This is absurd. I won't stand here being slandered by a woman too stubborn to recognize her limitations and some saddle tramp she's picked up God knows where." "Then we'll see you at the council meeting," Winnie replied firmly. "Good day, Mr. Montgomery." For a moment, it seemed the rancher might say more, but after a tense silence, he remounted his horse with a scowl. "This isn't over, Miss Taylor." With that parting shot, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following close behind. "Charming man," Vic observed dryly once they were gone. Despite the tension of the confrontation, Winnie found herself laughing. "He grows on you, like a fungus." Mrs. Abernathy, who had watched the exchange with increasing alarm, finally found her voice again. "Inside, both of you, before you draw more trouble. That ankle needs proper tending, Miss Winnie, and I suspect there's quite a story to be told." The housekeepers, fussing over Winnie's injury and shock at their tale of overnight shelter in the lined shack, provided a welcome distraction from the undercurrents still flowing between Winnie and Vic. By unspoken agreement, they downplayed certain aspects of their time together, emphasizing instead the evidence they had gathered against Montgomery. Dr. Patterson, summoned to examine Winnie's ankle, confirmed Vic's assessment: a severe sprain that would require at least a week of rest. "You're fortunate Mr. Thornton found you when he did," the doctor commented as he wrapped the injury properly. "Exposure and dehydration would have been serious concerns if you'd spent the night out there alone." "I know," Winnie replied, her eyes seeking Vic's across the room. "I've thanked him, but it hardly seems adequate." The doctor followed her gaze, a knowing expression crossing his weathered features. "Well now, perhaps you'll have time to find a more suitable expression of gratitude while you're recovering." Winnie flushed at the gentle teasing but didn't contradict him. As evening approached, Vic prepared to take his leave, despite Mrs. Abernathy's offer of the guest room. "I should return to Davidson's ranch," he explained. "They'll be wondering where I've been." Winnie insisted on seeing him out despite the doctor's orders to stay off her foot. Leaning on a crutch the doctor had provided, she accompanied Vic to the front porch. "Will I see you at the council meeting tomorrow?" she asked, suddenly reluctant to let him go. "I wouldn't miss it," he assured her. "Davidson's given me the morning off to testify if needed." "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Vic reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek in a gesture of surprising tenderness. "You're a remarkable woman, Winifred Taylor." Your father would be proud of how you're fighting for his legacy." Before she could respond, he leaned in and pressed a soft, brief kiss to her forehead, a gesture so proper yet so intimate that it left her breathless. "Until tomorrow," he murmured, then turned and walked to his waiting horse. Winnie watched him ride away, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the spot his lips had blessed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring beyond the council meeting, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt as though she wasn't facing the future entirely alone. The town hall was packed the following morning as Winnie made her way inside, leaning on her crutch. News of her accident and dramatic return with Vic Thornton had spread throughout Taylor, adding a layer of personal drama to what was already considered the most significant property dispute in the county's recent history. Eyes followed her as she made her way to the front of the room, where a table had been set up facing the 7-member town council. Thaddeus Montgomery was already seated at one end of the table, his lawyer beside him. The empty chair at the opposite end awaited her. Winnie scanned the crowd, relief washing over her when she spotted Vic standing against the back wall. Their eyes met briefly, his steady gaze offering silent support. Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order with a bang of his gavel. "We're here today to resolve the boundary dispute between the Taylor and Montgomery ranches," he announced. "Mr. Montgomery claims that approximately 2,000 acres along the northern border of the Taylor property were incorrectly surveyed and rightfully belong to his estate. Miss Taylor disputes this claim. Both parties have agreed to abide by the council's decision in this matter." The formalities proceeded with Montgomery presenting his case first. His lawyer displayed maps and documents purporting to show the correct boundary line, and called 2 witnesses, both Montgomery ranch hands, who testified that the survey markers had always been in their current positions. Throughout the presentation, Winnie remained calm, making occasional notes but otherwise showing no reaction. Vic watched her with admiration, impressed by her composure in the face of such blatant falsehoods. When it was Winnie's turn, she rose carefully, balancing on her crutch. "Gentlemen of the council, I'll be brief. Mr. Montgomery claims the boundary of my property runs along a line approximately 2,000 acres south of where my father always maintained it was. He bases this claim on the current position of survey markers that were placed when my father purchased the land 25 years ago." She paused, her clear voice carrying throughout the now silent room. "What Mr. Montgomery doesn't know what his men didn't know when they moved those markers recently is that the original surveyor, Mr. Josiah Fleming, followed a practice of placing small marker stones beneath each stake as a backup against exactly this type of tampering." A murmur ran through the crowd. Montgomery's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but the rancher waved him off, his expression thunderous. "I have here a letter from Mr. Fleming, now residing in San Antonio, confirming this practice," Winnie continued, handing the document to Mayor Harrison. "And more importantly, I have one of the original marker stones, found in its original position, a position that confirms the boundary as my father always maintained it." She produced the small stone Vic had found, passing it to the council for examination. "You can see it's marked with the date of the original survey and my father's initials." "This proves nothing," Montgomery interrupted. "Anyone could have placed that stone recently. Which is why I've also asked Mr. Victor Thornton to testify," Winnie replied smoothly. "Mr. Thornton, would you please come forward?" Vic made his way to the front of the room, every eye following his tall figure. He took his place beside Winnie, his presence steadying her more than the crutch under her arm. "Mr. Thornton, please tell the council what you discovered yesterday," Winnie prompted. In clear, concise terms, Vic described finding the disturbed survey markers, the evidence of recent digging, and the distinctive boot prints matching Montgomery's foreman. He produced his notebook with the detailed sketches and measurements he had made. The original marker stones were still in place beneath where the stakes had been before they were moved, he concluded. I found 3 of them, all in positions that align precisely with Miss Taylor's survey maps. And how do we know you're a reliable witness, Mr. Thornton? Montgomery's lawyer challenged. You're clearly friendly with Miss Taylor. Vic's expression remained impassive. I've been employed at the Davidson Ranch for 2 months. Before that, I worked at the Bar X in Colorado, the Rocking M in Wyoming, and served with distinction in the 4th Virginia Cavalry during the war. You're welcome to write to any of my previous employers for character references. The confidence and dignity with which he delivered this information silenced the lawyer momentarily. Mayor Harrison seized the opportunity to examine the evidence more closely, conferring quietly with the other council members. Mr. Montgomery, the mayor said finally, do you have any response to these serious allegations of marker tampering? The rancher's face had grown increasingly flushed during Vic's testimony. Now he rose abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger at Winnie. This is a fabrication. The girl knows she can't run that ranch alone and is desperate to maintain control. She's obviously enlisted this drifter to help her concoct evidence. That's enough, Thaddeus, the mayor said firmly. These are serious accusations on both sides. The council will need to deliberate before rendering a decision. What's to deliberate? Montgomery demanded. It's my word against hers and some cowboy she spent an unchaperoned night with. A scandalized murmur ran through the crowd at this blatant attack on Winnie's reputation. Vic took a half-step forward, his hand dropping instinctively to his gun belt, but Winnie's light touch on his arm stopped him. My father always said a man who resorts to personal attacks has already lost the argument on its merits, Mr. Montgomery, she said clearly, her voice carrying throughout the now silent room. I trust the council to see through such tactics and focus on the evidence before them. Mayor Harrison's gavel came down sharply. This meeting will recess for 1 hour while the council deliberates. Mr. Montgomery, I advise you to control yourself when we reconvene. As the council members filed out to a private room, the tension in the hall exploded into excited conversation. Winnie remained at the table, suddenly exhausted from the strain of standing on her injured ankle. You should sit down, Vic said quietly, pulling out her chair. You're pale. She sank gratefully into the seat. Thank you for everything, the testimony, the evidence. For stopping me from falling even further when he attacked my character. Vic's expression darkened. He's lucky you stopped me. A man who would stoop to such tactics deserves a more physical response. Violence wouldn't help our case, she reminded him gently. Besides, Montgomery is all bluster. His real power lies in his money and connections, not his own strength. Still, Vic muttered, there's something satisfying about the thought of knocking him down a peg or two. Despite the tension, Winnie found herself smiling at the protective instinct evident in his tone. My champion, she said softly, the words slipping out before she could consider them. Vic's eyes met hers, something vulnerable and honest passing between them. Always, he replied, equally quiet, if you'll have me. The implications of that simple statement hung between them, charged with possibility. Before Winnie could respond, however, they were interrupted by well-wishers from town coming to express their support and congratulate her on the evidence she had presented. The hour passed quickly, and soon the council members returned, their expressions grave. The room quieted instantly as Mayor Harrison took his seat at the center of the council table. After reviewing all evidence presented today, the mayor began formally, and considering the testimony of witnesses from both sides, this council has reached a unanimous decision. Montgomery sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Winnie felt Vic move to stand behind her chair, a solid presence at her back. The boundary between the Taylor and Montgomery properties shall remain as originally surveyed and recorded in the county land office 25 years ago, consistent with the marker stones discovered by Mr. Thornton and the testimony of the original surveyor via letter. Relief flooded through Winnie, making her momentarily light-headed. Vic's hand came to rest on her shoulder, steadying her. Furthermore, the mayor continued, his expression hardening, this council finds evidence of deliberate tampering with survey markers, a serious offense under county law. Sheriff Wilson, please take Mr. Montgomery's foreman, Jack Dawson, into custody pending further investigation. The sheriff stepped forward, moving toward a burly man in Montgomery's entourage who suddenly bolted for the door. 2 deputies intercepted him before he could escape. "This is outrageous," Montgomery thundered, rising to his feet. "You can't possibly—" "Sit down, Thaddeus," the mayor interrupted sharply. "Be grateful we're not investigating your own involvement more thoroughly. This council meeting is adjourned." The bang of the gavel was nearly drowned out by the explosion of conversation that followed. Montgomery stormed out, his remaining men trailing behind him, while townspeople surged forward to congratulate Winnie. Through it all, Vic remained at her side, a steady presence in the swirl of excitement. When the crowd finally began to thin, he leaned down to speak quietly in her ear. "You did it, Winnie. Your father would be proud." Tears of relief and triumph stung her eyes. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you, Vic." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition that what had begun as chance rescue had become something far more significant. The aftermath of the council decision brought changes to Taylor that rippled outward like stones dropped in a pond. Thaddeus Montgomery, his power and influence diminished by the public defeat and the investigation into his foreman's actions, withdrew from town affairs. Rumors circulated that he was considering selling his holdings and moving to California, though nothing came of it immediately. For Winnie, the victory brought more than just security for her land. It cemented her position as her father's true successor in the eyes of the town, earning her a respect that went beyond mere tolerance of a woman in a man's role. And for Vic, the events marked a turning point in a life that had lacked direction for too long. 2 days after the council meeting, he requested a private conversation with Winnie, arriving at the Taylor ranch house with an air of nervous determination that was altogether new for a man usually so composed. They sat on the front porch, the evening air warm and fragrant with early summer blossoms. Winnie's ankle, properly bandaged and rested, was healing well, though she still moved with care. "I've given notice at Davidson's ranch," Vic announced without preamble. Winnie's heart sank. "You're leaving Taylor?" "No," he said quickly, seeing her expression. I'm not explaining this well." He took a deep breath, seeming to gather himself. "Winnie, these past days have shown me something I've been looking for since the war ended, a purpose, a place, a reason to stop drifting." Hope began to replace disappointment in her chest. "And you found that here, in Taylor." "I've found it with you," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other only days, not months or years. But sometimes life gives you a clarity that can't be denied." Winnie's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying, Vic?" He reached across the space between them, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying that I don't want to be just the man who carried you home when you were hurt. I want to be the man who stands beside you every day, who helps you run this ranch, who builds a life with you, who—" He paused, his voice growing softer. "Who loves you if you'll let me." Tears welled in Winnie's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Most men would want to take over, not stand beside me," she whispered. "I told you," he replied with a small smile, "most men are fools." "You don't think it's too soon?" she asked, though her heart had already decided. "For some things, maybe," he acknowledged. "I'm not asking for promises yet, just a chance. A chance to see if what I feel for you, what I think you might feel for me, can grow into something lasting." Winnie looked at this man who had quite literally carried her through her darkest hour, who had fought for her land as if it were his own, who now offered something she had never truly expected to find, partnership rather than possession. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes to all of it, Vic. To seeing what this can become. To letting you stand beside me, too. To loving you, if that's where this leads us." The smile that transformed his face then was like sunrise breaking over the Texas plains, warm and bright and full of promise. With gentle reverence, he drew her closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed their understanding more surely than any formal agreement could have done. In that moment, beneath the vast Texas sky, Winifred Taylor knew that sometimes the most unexpected journey could lead to the most perfect destination. And Victor Thornton, who had carried her body when it was broken, now found himself entrusted with something far more precious, her heart, freely given. The months that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Vic proved himself not just a skilled rancher but a natural leader, earning the respect of the Taylor ranch hands through hard work and fair dealing. He moved into a small cabin on the property rather than the main house, mindful of Winnie's reputation despite their growing attachment. Their courtship unfolded with a blend of traditional formality and practical partnership. By day, they worked side by side to improve the ranch operations, Vic introducing innovative techniques he'd learned in his travels. By evening, they often shared dinner at the main house, sometimes joined by Mrs. Abernathy as chaperone, sometimes stealing private moments on the porch swing beneath the stars. The town of Taylor watched their developing relationship with interest and, for the most part, approval. Winnie Taylor had proven herself a force to be reckoned with during the boundary dispute, and Victor Thornton was increasingly regarded as a steady, honorable addition to the community. That he clearly adored, Winnie only added to his standing. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the annual cattle drive to market, Vic found himself standing once more on the porch of the Taylor ranch house, his heart pounding with nervousness that no battle had ever induced. Winnie greeted him with a smile that still made his breath catch. "You look serious tonight," she observed, taking his hand and drawing him to their usual spot on the porch swing. "I have serious things on my mind," he admitted, reaching into his pocket. "Winnie, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, working alongside you, seeing your strength and kindness every day. It's healed something in me I thought was broken forever." Her eyes softened with understanding. "You've done the same for me, Vic. After Father died, I thought I would have to face everything alone. You changed that. I want to keep changing it," he said quietly, withdrawing a small velvet box from his pocket. "If you'll let me." Winnie's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds in a gold setting. "Winifred Taylor," Vic continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you for the rest of our lives?" Tears spilled down Winnie's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. "Yes," she finally managed. Yes, Victor Thornton, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised all the passion and tenderness their future would hold. The wedding took place on the first day of spring in 1877, beneath an arch of early blooming roses in the garden behind the Taylor ranch house. The entire town seemed to attend, the bitter memory of Thaddeus Montgomery's accusations long since replaced by genuine affection for the couple. Winnie wore her mother's wedding dress, lovingly altered by Mrs. Abernathy to suit her taller frame. Vic stood waiting for her beneath the arch, looking more handsome than ever in a new suit, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as she walked toward him on the arm of Mayor Harrison, who had agreed to give her away. "Dearly beloved," began the minister, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the traditional vows taking on new meaning for a couple who had already proven their commitment to standing by each other through adversity. When Vic slipped the gold band onto Winnie's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister concluded with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Their kiss, sweet and reverent despite the audience, was met with enthusiastic applause and a few good-natured whistles from the ranch hands. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up across the ranch yard and lanterns hung from trees to illuminate the dancing and feasting. Winnie and Vic moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends old and new. As the night grew late and the last of the guests began to depart, Vic found Winnie standing at the edge of the garden, looking out over the moonlit pastures that stretched to the horizon. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked teasingly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, her hands covering his. "Not a single one. Just thinking how strange life can be. If I hadn't twisted my ankle that day, if you hadn't been tracking strays in that exact area, I would have found you somehow," Vic murmured against her hair. "I'm convinced of that now. Some things are meant to be." Winnie turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Take me home, husband." "As you wish, wife," he replied with a smile, sweeping her into his arms just as he had on that first day. But this time, instead of carrying her miles to safety, he carried her across the threshold of the ranch house that was now truly their home, the first step in a journey they would take together for all the days to come. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The Taylor Thornton Ranch, as it came to be known, flourished under their joint stewardship. Vic's experience from ranches across the West, combined with Winnie's deep knowledge of the local land and markets, created an operation that became known throughout Texas for its innovation and success. Their first child, a son they named James after Winnie's father, arrived a year after their marriage. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited her mother's determined spirit and her father's steady calm. A third child, another son named Michael, completed their family 3 years after that. Through it all, the drought years and the bountiful ones, the market fluctuations and the changing landscape of the West as railroads expanded and new settlements grew, Vic and Winnie remained partners in the truest sense, facing each new challenge together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat once more on the porch swing where Vic had proposed, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over land that had prospered under their care. "You ever think about that day?" Winnie asked, her head resting on Vic's shoulder. "The day I twisted my ankle and you found me," "Only every time I look at you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Only every time I think about how fortunate I am." "We both were," she murmured. "You carried me home that day, but in so many ways we've been carrying each other ever since." Vic's arm tightened around her shoulders. "And we always will, Winnie. All the way home, wherever that may be." As twilight deepened into night, they called their children in for supper. The five of them gathering around the table in a home filled with love and laughter, a home that had begun with an accident on a rocky slope, and a cowboy who had carried more than just a wounded woman in his arms that day. He had carried the beginning of a dream, a future neither of them could have imagined alone, but one they had built together, step by careful step, all the way home.